Welcome world to Leadership Lessons episode 3. I am your host Louis Howell, and of course I'm here with my wonderful co-host Mr. Keshav Bhatt.
I don't even hang though.
Oh, sorry bro. Do you know what? That must have hurt. I know, that must have hurt. I'm sorry.
Thanks for the cut.
Yeah, thanks for the cut. Early doors, guys. But anyway, you know we're not cutting this out. You know we don't edit. So we're here again, and we're actually at the office space today. I don't think we've ever showed our viewers the office space before. We must do a video one day about that alone.
It's cool.
But we are welcomed by two amazing guests, and I'm very, very excited. So I'm good. Sorry, bro. Ladies first. Just because there's the respect we show. So we're actually here with Elspeth, who's campaign manager at Undivided. So thank you very much for joining us today, Elspeth. And we are going to get both of our guests to tell you guys a bit about themselves, their background, and what they're passionate about. And we're also joined by Jenardan. Good to see you again, brother.
Good to see you too.
Who, of course, is an alumni of our Revolution Hive Leadership Academy. And, he's also a medical student, which is massively exciting because, I'll be honest, it just shows that academia takes you a long way, and it's something that I admire you for. That alone, just to sit with a medical student, I feel blessed right now. I feel blessed. So yeah, we got some very, very exciting stuff in store. Before we go into thanks for the cut, I would just love for you guys to introduce yourselves to our online audience, who are predominantly young people who are very, very interested in being able to make a positive change within their own lives and in their own character, but then also for the world around them, who are interested in seeing how they can make an impact within the society that they live in. And most of them are sort of aged between 16 going up to sort of 35 at the highest end. But then we do get people of other ages too. And we don't discriminate, and we're just here to try and just, add value to the world. So guys, please introduce yourselves.
Cool. All right. So yeah, as Lewis said, I'm Elspeth. I run a campaign called Undivided. My background is more creative, so like writing, English literature kind of background.
Nice.
And then I set up a political campaign.
Really?
So working to kind of get 13 to 29-year-olds' opinions on Brexit and other political issues like high on the government agenda.
There you go. So when you guys are hearing all this talk about like what do young people think about Brexit, this is the authority, guys. This is the authority.
Wow.
Thank you very much for joining us, Elspeth. And I saw Kesh get a bit excited when you said
because I did an English literature degree.
Oh yeah.
He did. So you guys
it can take you anywhere, guys.
And I studied biology. I don't know if that means we can connect. I'll try. I don't know.
Like a science.
We can get something. Yeah, this is like the English side. We can do something here. And Jenardan, please, man.
So yeah, thank you for the introduction again, Lewis. And as Lewis mentioned, I'm a medical student at the moment, and it is very academic. And I think that really stems from the background that I'm from. So my parents are from Sri Lanka, and exploring more of my roots, I've really understood how growing up in Sri Lanka, access to education was something that they really struggled with. So having come to a place where there were so many opportunities to get involved with academia, I feel like that was really strongly influenced upon me from a young age. And so that might have influenced me to go more towards a sort of medical degree as well. But my sort of other interests lie within trying to see how a medical degree and how our well-being, both, physically, emotionally and mentally, can also enable us to be the strongest versions of ourselves. And sort of underpinning all of this, and why I initially got involved with Revolution Hive, was to try and make myself as useful as I can. And so, glad to be back here as an alumni.
Bro, and you're looking more than useful. I'm not gonna lie, looking in great shape. I'll be honest, like Jenardan's looking in great shape. Like we need to get back in the park, get pull ups or something. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, guys, I'm excited for this show because this topic is something that of course, is very, very relevant. But also, what I love is that. I'm obviously blessed to be with Kesh every day, and Kesh is one of those people who naturally when he speaks, he doesn't just make empty comments. He always tries to back things up with experience, evidence, etc. But knowing that I've got you two here to do that as well, hopefully I can keep up. But I'm really excited for the show because not only are we speaking about a fantastic topic, we're also joined by people who can really speak from experience and add massive credibility to what we're going to be talking about. And today's topic is
the outcome of the next general election going to be shaped by the youth and young voters? So we're going to be getting into that in a little while, but as always, we're going to start with thanks for the cut. So there's 4 of us today, so we're not going to go into all 4 of us. So Lewis and Jenardan are going to share their thanks for the cut. So who wants to go first, seeing as you got the science side over here?
So do you want to share a cut? Have you had a cut this week that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I like how you put the cut more towards the science.
Because we dissect prompts and that. Is that what you don't think? Just because we're science, we dissect things and cut things. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so the cut that I've kind of experienced this week as well, especially, is with a project that I've been involved in, just trying to republish an old book, which initially started off as a favour, and there was a bit of reluctance when the idea was proposed to me to just kind of, you know, sit down, type up the whole work again. But, you know, I realised that this was a point where, using a bit of self-awareness, that my desire to not want to let people down, and also the belief that I can do everything, got in the way. So now I found myself in a position where I'm just retyping this book, and it's quite a mundane job, just trying to motivate myself as much as I can for it. But I've projected that at the rate I'm going at the moment, it's going to take me at least 24 hours of solid work of just sitting down, just typing it up. And so what I've really learned from this experience of doing something without really, first of all, giving it much thought and time before I committed to it, is that having said yes to this opportunity has now meant that I've had to say no to a lot of other opportunities. And in terms of how I prioritize things, I feel like, you know, having said yes to this means that the other important projects I wanted to get involved with are having to take a seat back. And it's something I know I've always kind of struggled with as well. And I think it's something that we all tend to struggle with, maybe potentially at this age, where you have so many opportunities coming your way, you just don't know what to say yes to. And so what I've really learned from this lesson is to see opportunities as something, yes, that could kind of grow your skills and so on, but then to also ask yourself the question of, what are you saying no to by saying yes to this opportunity? And I think that would really help me going forward with further opportunities.
And that critical analysis that you did there, and, you know, use the word self-awareness, I think that's something that we use that word too loosely sometimes without really realizing how powerful that is. Because self-awareness is like something that you can teach that, but it's something that unfortunately we're not taught. And I think that is so important because, you know, it's like we all have to know where our skills lie and where our skills don't lie. We all have to know, you know, like, what are we genuinely going to be committed to and what we're not going to be committed to. People always say, oh no, you must show 100% commitment, because they make comments like, how you do something is how you do everything. And as much as that is true, there is an element of, well, no, because actually, if you told me to play football all day, I genuinely play football all day. But if you told me to play cricket all day, as much as I love sport and being fit and being active, I probably wouldn't play cricket all day. And so, as much as they might say how you do something is how you do everything, but that's only true to an extent. And so, you know, hats off to you for that. And but what I find quite interesting, maybe this is because this is the science side, you did a calculation of saying it's going to take me 20 to 24 hours to do this. But that's powerful, because then when we move it into other sides of, you know, personal development and stuff like that, you're thinking about the time commitment. Now you're able to say, well, okay, how can I potentially execute on that 20 to 24 hours across, say, a 2-week period or a 3-week period or a 4-week period, allowing you then to hopefully not have to say no to too many things, because you're not thinking, oh my God, I've got to do this and it's going to take me 20 to 24 hours, which means I need to get it done right now. Maybe you're able to say, well, actually, I can spread it out across 2 weeks and it only becomes 2 hours a day or something like that. And so, you know, and so for me, I very much admire that. And I think, you know, your response was fantastic. So although you got the cut, hats off to you, man. Hats off to you.
Thank you very much.
And on this side, the English side.
All right.
No, it's you now.
Oh, it's me?
Yeah.
As well?
Yeah.
All right. No, let's throw it here first.
Okay.
You know, we might see what comes like.
All right. So, I mean, I make mistakes pretty much every day. But
As do we.
This is the biggest one of the week. So I was basically given a task, which I knew as soon as I was given it, I was like, I'm going to struggle with that.
Yeah.
So really like heavy maths task, and I am no mathlete. So, you know, I did an English degree, like maths is not my strong point. I've sort of got by in my job, I have to be able to do a fair bit of like finance, but this was like another level. So I started doing it and I was like 3 hours in such like a fluster, because I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And it got to the point where I was like, I actually don't think I'm the best person to do this. Like, I can carry on pretending and trying to figure it out the hard way, but I don't think it's actually going to work. So I had to go find got in touch with someone who I knew would be able to help. And I was like, here, like, this is the task. I've got myself in a bit of state because I don't think I've got the skills to do it.
Yeah.
I want to try and I want to learn, but I just really appreciate a bit of help. And she actually said, let me take a look at it and I'll give you my thoughts. She spent like a little bit of time going over it, and then like it just made so much difference. She was like, this is how I structure it, this is what I do, then do this and then do that. And just actually asking her for help, I realised it was kind of like one of those things like, oh, am I losing like a bit of pride in doing it? But I was like, actually no, like it was so good. So I sort of wish like before I even started it and just sort of, you know, got myself in a bit of a state, actually saying, hey, can you like spend a couple of minutes and help me out? So learned the hard way, thanks for the cut, but in the end I got a really like valuable lesson out of it.
Wow, amazing. That is truly amazing. And I think again it's that self-awareness though. You know, you had to identify what was going to be most lucrative for you and what maybe wasn't. So, you know what I mean? This is why I said we're joined by some amazing guests. This is why I said that. I'm really excited. You know what I mean? So do I still have to share a cup? Or they were kind of strong.
Yeah, they were strong, and I really want to get on to the main topic because I feel like that's going to need a lot of time. So,
okay, so we can...
But I just wanted to add that I think the key thing there is that you talked about self-awareness, and the power of that is knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses. And the interesting thing is that the more self-acceptance you generate, and you have to really practice that on an ongoing basis, the more your self-esteem increases. So just being okay with, I'm not that good at maths.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in that situation, and a lot of us try to be jacks of all trades and try and, no, I need to prove to myself for my own self-worth that I can do maths because I need to prove to other people, or I need to prove, but just sometimes being okay with, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to one of my friends this week, and she was saying how she had her final medical exams, and in the OSCEs, right? She had a question where she was at a station observing a patient, and she just said, I'm sorry, but I really don't know the answer to this, and I don't want to lie to you. And it'd be interesting to see how that, you know, affects her results, but I think that's a really, really strong way to respond to something like that, to say, I don't know. And sometimes, like we know with the recession, people pretending to know more than they did has got them into trouble. So it's very, very admirable that you...
And when you do that, you open yourself up to, one, people actually are very, very happy to see that you're willing to accept you're human. And I think people are more engaged to you for that, because then they're like, oh, like, you know, you're willing to champion your weaknesses in some ways. And in which case, they then turn around and say, well, how can I help you? And that's what you do, you open yourself up to support. Like, you know, people... I think I must have spoken about this at least on one of our videos or podcasts before, but you know, there is often a narrative, especially I know among some of my old friendship group, where people are like, oh, you know, I don't need anyone, I've done it all on my own. It's like, no, you haven't. Like, every single one of us is here because of someone else. Like, someone made this chair we're sitting on, someone made these clothes that are on our back, you know, so you haven't done anything on your own. Like, someone had to play a part in where you are today, in your life, in the things you have, and in where you're going. And so for that reason, what you have to be able to do is accept that, yeah, I'm not great at this, but someone else is. And hopefully I am in a position where they're willing to help me. Whatever it requires me to do in order for them to be open to helping me, I'm willing to do. And that's okay. But anyway, as we said, into the topic. And because you chose today's topic, Kesh, I think you should introduce it. You should set the scene. And then you should, you know, pass it on to our amazing guest today.
Okay, yeah. So the topic of focus for today, we've got the general election coming up. And it's not long to go. By the time this episode goes out next week, you know, people are going to be already probably have made their decisions on who they're going to vote for, which party, things like that. And this is the I guess the proposition I'm going to put forward for the discussion is, can young people in this election become that driving force and that voice? And obviously it requires a lot of things like turnout and things like that. But the driving voice and the biggest influence on the outcome, and how far can that influence really go? I know that there was a study done recently where they surveyed young people to see where they're looking to vote at the moment. And if it was based on just votes of that 18 to kind of 24, 30 bracket, I think you're loading up the stat now.
Yeah.
They would predominantly vote for Jeremy Corbyn. And so that's very counter to the narrative that we're seeing in the mainstream media. So that's the question I wanted to put to you is, what influence do you think young people can have on this election and wider politics? And where do you see it playing out? So both in theory, but also in practice. So I don't know if anybody has any particular opinions that they want to lead with there. I know just from, you know, we had a few discussions beforehand about this, so I know you've definitely got something.
Yeah, of course. I think, you know, what's interesting for me is that I feel as if young people are actively starting to share their opinions and are not only waiting to be given a voice, but they're almost taking that opportunity to have a voice now. What they tend to do, though, is they do it in the mediums in which they feel comfortable. So in order for them to be the driving force, I think, we're fortunate enough to have campaigns like yours, Elspeth, which are really breaking down those barriers, but we need more people supporting either your campaign or doing things to help young people to feel comfortable in this political arena and this political world. Now, of course, there is something that needs to be said there, which is the fact that this political world is no different to the world we live in every single day. We are all engaging in some form of politics in every single thing that we do. Like my sister made a joke because I still live with my parents, and my sister made a joke because I said to my mum, do you know what, mum? I'm thinking that my new cereal is going to be granola instead of bite-sized shredded wheat. And she was like, what kind of conversation is that? But that's very political in some way, because I had to make a decision about, why do I want granola instead of shredded wheat? Like what's that going to add to my body nutrient-wise, and all that's a political decision in many ways, because I've now decided to choose one particular type of cereal, or I've decided to choose one particular brand, potentially. The clothes that we wear, that's a political decision. The friends that we choose, we were speaking earlier about the office space we chose. These, in some ways, these are political decisions, but young people are not always made aware of the fact that just because you don't necessarily engage in party politics doesn't mean you are not political. And so for that reason, I think that young people can be the driving force, but they need to be made to feel comfortable engaging in political conversations.
I think that word is very key.
Yeah.
You said two things there, comfortable and world. So one is, there is a fear of expressing a political opinion. And sometimes it's done so without a solid basis. And sometimes though there were a few people that I spoke to try and get them on the show, but they were afraid to come on and articulate, because often what happens is people react very emotionally when they encounter data or stories or evidence or anecdotes or opinions in counter to their own. So there's a piece around how we're educating our young people to engage in dialectic. So engaging and discussing opinions, which is something they did in the Greek time of Socrates. But the other thing you mentioned was the political world and understanding that. And I asked a question on my Facebook. We're working on a very, very special video that we're going to film next week, that you'll definitely hear about. I can't say much more about that at the moment, but I was asking, what are some of the key things that young people need to hear from us? And someone said something very powerful, which is one of my main points, is what they can do after the election.
So I've got a couple of thoughts on this. There's traditional politics, and then there's non-traditional politics. And politics is as you said, every issue. The thing at the moment with traditional politics is, the reality is we're in a bit of a cycle, right? So young people typically aren't registered versus the older generations. So that means that it's the cycle that, because young people aren't registered, the party politicians, they don't make their manifestos tailored to young people's needs. It's I always think, say you're hosting a barbecue, you've got 20 people coming, that 18 of them who are coming are meat eaters, you don't know about the others, but you're not going to serve a vegetarian main dish because you're I know that, I need to score points with the people who I know are going to vote for me. They're the meat eaters, so I'm going to cook a meat dish. It's literally like that. So because older generations are registered and there'll be turnout, almost double that of young people, which has typically been at 40% in the last general election, that means that they're sort of thinking, well, I'll get an easy win if I make my policies about pensions or, that sort of thing. So if young people, even, if we get young people turned up in this general election, even if it doesn't sway the result, it means that over the next few years, they're going to have to say, hang on a minute, we've still got millions of young people on the electoral register, and they're going to have to start to shift that. So it might change the overall result, but if it doesn't, it's still doing a huge thing towards making something a bit different there. Definitely. And then there's the non-traditional politics, and that is, you can actually influence the system from the outside. So that's kind of what Undivided's been doing, but there are so many other kind of grassroots movements that do that. And yes, we've got this system which we have to kind of buy into, and we, it's good to vote, and it's really important to shift that for all the reasons I just said, but you can do a lot from the outside as well. You can you can get things in attention in Parliament, you can get media. If you talk about mental health, if that's an issue you care about, you can do a lot with that. So it's kind of thinking, how can I like change the system from the outside as well as the inside?
Very true, amazing, and I think that's so important. I'd love to come back to that second point that you made there, but so we can give some, some practical tips and some practical advice for those young people that may be watching and saying, I want to be able to affect this. So even after I voted, so to link it off of what Keshav just referencing, that someone said, what can they do after the election? And I think there's no better person placed than to make those recommendations. But Jenardan, for yourself, man, what are your thoughts on this topic of whether young people can be the driving force behind this election?
Yeah, interesting how you kind of picked up on my silence there as well, because when Keshav proposed that this is what we're going to be talking about, I told him straight up, politics is an area that I haven't really engaged with, and I'm guilty of doing that. And like, hearing how not registering, even though I just registered a couple of days ago, can influence what we...
I mean, we have to give a bit more love to that. So well done, mate. Well done.
Leadership lesson.
And actually, there's don't forget what you were going to say, but really quickly, there was something you said which was really interesting to me, which was the guilt that you're made to feel, and also, like, I want to get to a point where that's not celebrated. It's like, okay, about time, carry on, So those are two things that I think we need to also be aware of. But you were saying.
Yeah, it's interesting you picked up on that as well, because right now just getting this high five, I was just like, I shouldn't be getting a high five for just registering. Is what I was thinking. But so I feel like the reason as to maybe why I haven't engaged as much, this is something I've been kind of reflecting on throughout this week ever since this idea was proposed, is as silly as it sounds, I feel like it kind of it goes back down to two moments where I felt like I was really disappointed with the way things were going. So when I started off, I was, really quite actively involved in reading up about the politics that were happening in Sri Lanka during the genocide and during the actual ethnic conflict around the periods of 2009. So I was 17 at the time. And going to all of the campaigns, the protests, educating as many people as I could about it, raising as much awareness. And that's when I was really engaged with it, aside from the other interests that I had within medicine, health and so on as well. But then I remember there was a point, having gone to all these protests where so many people, to raise that awareness of what was happening back in Sri Lanka, to then a week later find out in the news that Britain were dealing arms to the people who were kind of causing all of this as well. I felt really let down at that moment. And the first question that ran through my head, similar to the hours that I talked about earlier, is I invested this many hours, but what's been the outcome of that? So I felt like I wasn't in a position where I could do much anyway. And the thought that came into my mind at that moment is, had I invested all of these hours into, let's say, my education, or made it into medicine first time round, because it took me about 4 attempts, right? Is that I could have potentially had a much bigger impact, bigger impact. And I'm seeing this right now. So I feel like being a medical student, I've got more credibility and a much bigger ability to influence than I did as an A-level student or as a GCSE student. And I know that, once I graduate, become a doctor, that influence and that credibility is going to grow as well, which is one of the, as odd as it sounds, one of the other reasons as to why I wanted to do medicine as well. And then the second time where I felt a bit let down again was with the whole rise in tuition fees. And once again, this was like a very personal scenario again. And I think that's just unfortunate, like learning more and more about human psychology and just marketing and so on as well. We're all about us. And so I'm guilty of saying, these are scenarios which kind of were really personal and relevant to me as well. But those scenarios where I felt let down was a point where I was just like, I'm not going to invest as much time in politics now. I'm just going to focus on trying to fill up my own cup, trying to strengthen myself so that I can then re-engage potentially in a position where I can have a much bigger influence. And to try and invest my time that way. But in the meantime, when it does come to voting, I have voted every single time. And the way I've kind of gone about trying to vote is, just like, for example, if you've got something wrong with your health, you go to a doctor and ask for their sort of advice. You don't necessarily go and learn the whole medical degree and then go and get their advice. So with that same way, within my group of friends, within my sort of social support, I know there are certain people who have similar values to myself, and who I know who have, similar, and if they've got certain interests in politics as well, then I just kind of learn from them, which I've just found to be a much easier way to kind of absorb that information and then base my vote on that as well. So in terms of how, going back to the original question of how potentially, young people could sway the vote, I feel like a strong point and, a strong area of influence is from the sort of campaigns that you're doing, which is engaging more of this kind of conversation. So the more that, let's say, someone else within my social circle is interested in sort of politics, the more I can learn from them, and then therefore I can also have that kind of ripple effect, even though I'm not at the heart of the politics, and even if that's not where my strength or interest necessarily lies.
I want to pick up on two things that you said, and thank you very much both of you for sharing quickly there. Two things that you said. One was you were speaking about the fact that you try to go to the group of friends you have, or purposely surround yourself with people who you feel are more knowledgeable than you potentially in politics, to learn from them. And it's just funny because we had a previous podcast where originally we thought me and Shirin were going to just go at each other's head about it, because I was saying that I don't really watch the news, and I don't necessarily read the news in the same, and she was like, what do you mean? We're running an organization. And I was like, no, but you don't understand. Shirin, you are one of my closest friends. I can ask you about your views and understanding of certain things that are going on, so that where I may come from a position of having had less knowledge about that, I'm now able to make decisions and absorb information about what I do then see in the mainstream media from a better standpoint, because I've now taken on board what I need to know from someone like you who's more knowledgeable. So again, I'm in agreement with you on that point. If you're not so knowledgeable, it's okay to just sit around people who are more knowledgeable and just be silent, like Keshav was already knowledgeable what's going on and doing another course full of a load of lectures around like world politics, and I'm just like, every time he goes to session, so tell me about it, and I can just sit there silently and just log everything he's teaching. But the other thing was how you were saying that you wanted to fill your own cup first, and that's interesting because I think there's one side that I'll come back to, but there's one element where it's like, I truly understand that, because I remember being asked a few years ago, someone said like, why do people want to be famous? Like, being famous doesn't mean anything. And I said, actually, I would very much like to be famous. The reason being, not because I want people to look at me for my own vanity, but because you do get influence. Like, what we're doing now might be viewed by X amount of people. But if I get to the level of fame that I'd like to get to by doing the good things for the world I want to do, no disrespect, but like, when Muhammad Ali spoke when he was at the height of his career, and us speaking now, I guarantee more people know his message than know ours right now. And so to be fair, filling your own cup and getting to a level where a lot of people are following you and you can have that level of influence, that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with me being a professional footballer on TV every single day whilst running multiple organizations, and people are going, oh my God, who's this Lewis Howell guy? But then every time they say, how was the game? I say, well, how's Syria? But we don't know how the game was, but how's Syria? And then now you've got young people going, oh my gosh, like, we should be thinking about Syria and all these other things going on. So there's nothing wrong with that in many ways, you know what I mean? So filling your own cup, putting the gas mask on you first, that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know what I mean? So hats off to you for that.
But that's what I also love about Revolution Hive, and one of the reasons why I've tried to stay engaged is that this message that you've just shared of trying to fill your own cup comes from that place of re-emphasizing that it's also with that vision of how can you influence that world around you. And I think, when you take a look at that with the personal development world and filling your own cup, even within medical school, I see it as well, unfortunately, is that when you're so bombarded with everything around you, with all of the pressures and demands, you get so focused on just trying to fill your own cup and jumping through the hoops that you sometimes forget about the outside world. So I think, having a sort of platform like Revolution Hive, or an organisation where you're constantly emphasising this point and drilling it home, is very important. So
and that's why I wanted to bring it back to Elspeth, because you also mentioned the fact that young people are essentially but you personally, because you didn't necessarily know as much about politics, you were kind of like, how can I go about having that voice? But I think Elspeth can speak perfectly around those young people being able to use the platforms they do know well. So even if they don't know the political world well, using the platforms they do know well and looking at the ways in which they can have an influence with the knowledge they do have. So yeah, Elspeth, would you love to? I would great if you could speak to
definitely.
that.
I might also just say, like, I think because I do this thing where I'm like wearing two hats, right? So I'm like kind of working with young people day in, day out, like people of our generation, finding out like the issues they care about, like on the most day-to-day level. But then I'm also meeting MPs and I'm also speaking in Parliament and doing that stuff. And that's like, it's a really weird crossover, right?
Of course.
But I'm always kind of bridging that too. So I think from that, I've kind of seen that totally prioritize your own, like, do well in school, do your own things, like fill your own cup. But also there are kind of things that are going on, like bigger problems that are very difficult to, to solve. So things like housing for young people, things like Erasmus Plus that might be under threat, stuff like that actually the system does need to prioritise. So there's kind of a bit of both. I think on the point around like online platforms, like I guess that's the whole thing with Undivided. It was like, young people's behaviours isn't like I'm going to write to my MP when I care about an issue. It's like that is the most outdated thing. So we were like, let's get a real-time system. Let's get people, sharing stuff on Facebook, sharing stuff on their Twitter, sharing stuff on our website, and that's what we're going to feed into MPs and Parliament. So we're like, let's use the behaviours we know that young people like. Like it's really it's really hard to go write a letter. It's really hard to go to an MP surgery. I didn't even know they existed. So it's all about using the platforms that you know and you like, and actually they can have an impact. Like say something on a website, it will get heard. Definitely. So I think and politicians need to recognise that as well. Like they need to consciously recognise where young people are having the conversations, actively listen to those, and like give us the time of day on it.
Have politicians and MPs been surprised by the level of, it might be the level of understanding, it might be the way in which our young people articulate themselves. Have they been surprised in any way by some of the, input that young people are having into these political conversations?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think one of the things that I realised is like we have 13-year-olds sharing like the most like forward-thinking, mature solutions, and I'm like, you guys are so clever. Like politicians need to hear this. And sometimes we don't speak in like policy language. We don't speak in the way politicians do, but that's like better. We're like normal people, but we know like the issues that are affecting us, and we know what we care about. And like every time we've met with MPs or we've shared feedback from young people, they're always a bit surprised. They're like, I think they're taken aback. They're like, oh, I didn't expect this,
Of course.
So I think just keep saying it, guys, because they're going to listen. Like they have to.
Definitely. Kesh, what are your thoughts? Because you posed the question, but you haven't necessarily.
I think that young people will definitely have more of a voice in this election. I think also there are a lot of issues that young people have been talking about, like mental health, for a number of years, that are going to come more to the forefront. And I think it's interesting that this time is the first time where I've seen a bit more of a focus in the policies and the language of politicians towards young people. And I guess it's really hard to say because one of the best things that I've read or learned is anyone who makes a prediction or tells you that this is exactly what's going to happen, don't listen to them, because no one knows. We're increasingly living in a world where anything can really happen, and we've seen that in other countries with Trump. We've seen it, go from one end to the other, where we thought that the Brexit vote was going to be Remain, and actually it was to leave. So it's very difficult to predict. But I think one interesting thing will be to see the intergenerational divide, and I think that's part of the vicious cycle that you mentioned, where increasingly, because the policies are geared towards the people who are registered to vote, that's who they're going to go for. But I can see, certain policies and parties going for that youth vote. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But even within my own household and the community that I'm from, I can see the difference in the views that young people have and the views that, my aunties, uncles, parents have, which are slightly more conservative. And I think that's because our generation is more likely to be civic-minded, is more, we're less likely to be religious. And that's where I think it's beginning to shift. And I'd like to see that in the outcome. But it's very difficult to tell at this stage, what could happen. And one thing that I would definitely add is that, a lot of people are saying that, and this is just my own personal opinion, that Jeremy Corbyn is unelectable. But let's not forget that Tony Blair, who orchestrated and decided beforehand, and this is proven, to go to war in Iraq before, or whether or not they were going to have weapons of mass destruction, he was still elected again. So how can you tell me that someone is unelectable? And regardless of what you think about Corbyn or Labour or Theresa May or the Liberal Democrats or the Greens, why is the narrative more focused on the individual and the personality than the policies? So, go and look up the manifesto, go and read it and decide for yourself, what do you think and what do you want to champion? Because you are a voice to the 3 people in this room, or the 4 people who follow you on Twitter, or the 100,000 that follow your YouTube channel. You're a voice. And even if you're just talking about, let's just go and vote for no one, that's still a political action. And then to continue it, because I think whatever the result, we should use that to engage more than to exit. And you know, when you're finding out about things like the Panama Papers, where people are using offshore bank accounts to funnel money away and are living in a completely different world to us, I think it's very, very important that we use not just the vote, but the mobile phone as your vote and the tweets that you're putting out, because your voice has an influence. And you telling me about the, you know, the things happening in Sri Lanka, I didn't know that before this episode. So now I'm interested in going and finding out, okay, so it's not just Lockheed Martin who we're paying to do our census in 2011. There's also other things that are going on. So yeah, I think, you know, to answer the question, how much of a voice do I think young people have? I think they're already having a very, very big voice. And we saw that with the reaction that Nick Clegg had when he had to go back on his word, you know, not to increase the tuition fees. And I think that that's partly why the Labour Party are probably, you know, saying that we're going to get rid of tuition fees. So yeah, I think they already have a very big voice. It's just a question of how loud it's going to be in this next general election.
And you guys have referenced a few things, and I'll pick up on what you just mentioned there, Kesh, around you were saying that, you know, young people need to be aware of how to go about ensuring that they are well informed and just not buying into what's put into public attention. So for example, the media and obviously specific outlets will choose to position and, you know, probably shine more of a spotlight on the personality of the particular leaders as opposed to what they represent, as opposed to what their parties are buying into. Because remember, they're just the face of a party, really. They're not the party. But how do we get more, or do we need to, is the first question, because maybe we don't even need to. Do we need to? And if so, how do we get more young people to really start to think critically about this political world with regards to not just buying into the fact that Jeremy Corbyn is seen as really socialist or really left, but actually to understand what his, you know, manifesto means, how that will look in practice, and then, you know, the same for the right, the same for the other parties that exist. Do we need to get young people to actually become more well informed? And if so, how do we go about ensuring that the young people who are making an active attempt to become more informed are the ones that are leading, or hopefully leading, the conversation?
I think, you know, it's so right, like the media, you know, the media do such a spin on everything, right? And it's just someone's opinion. Ultimately, there is, you know, someone running that campaign in a certain way.
Of course.
So what I think we need to do, like, look at our electoral system. We elect an MP. So we elect MPs and they kind of represent your area in Parliament. So I've been saying to people, like, actually, ignore like what you're seeing on the news, ignore kind of the spats between Corbyn and May and the other leaders, and find out what your local MP is doing. Find out what they're doing in your community. You know, what are they prioritising? Because that's how it's going to affect you on the most day-to-day level. Like, you know, when you think, will this person who's leading the party like actually look out for me? Your MP will, and then, you know, there's not enough like kind of pressure and not enough accountability on that. But I was looking at like different leaflets the other day from the people who are running in my area, and I was like, okay, like I understand what you're going to do for like, you know, recycling in my area, or I get what you're doing for youth services. That's going to affect me on the most day-to-day level. So, you know, in some ways, just look at that and vote on that, because that's how it's going to affect you.
Interesting. Okay. And so then essentially once young people are becoming more aware of that, that's when they can start to spread that message.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's really hard to understand. Well, I find it hard, and I'm like running a political campaign, right? But to look at all the manifestos sometimes and think, what does that mean and what does this mean? And it's not presented in a way that makes any sense to anyone. Like, you know, adults who work in politics are like, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but pull it down to the day-to-day stuff.
And that's why we thank you for the work that you do to ensure that, you know, the everyday person can understand these things. Because, you know, there's a lot of political jargon that is used. And, you know, like, I mean, I was very similar to yourself, bro. Like, I didn't necessarily engage massively in trying to keep informed with politics. And as I've gone to search for that information and started reading books about it, I'm sitting there going, like, some of the words they're using are ridiculous. Like,
it's like they don't want us to understand.
You know, I'm just like, you know, some of the words they're using are crazy. And then it's only when you actually go and read.
The craziest one for me was filibuster.
Yeah, filibuster. Yeah, that, you know, I got that from Barack Obama's book, and I was like, what is a filibuster? I thought that was like a joke. I thought it was like a cross between Blockbuster and Ghostbusters, like combine together. I thought I was just going to watch a film in like the Houses of Parliament and just watch films and they go like, we're going to make a decision based on whatever Neo did in The Matrix. That is the decision, guys.
And we have like 3-line whips and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Like, sorry, what?
Yeah,
like,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not about that. Though.
No,
you know,
it's crazy.
It's about
It's crazy.
like housing. It's about local transport in your area. It's about the stuff that it actually affects you on day to day. Forget all that jargon at the top. Don't spend your time on that. Like focus on the stuff that will actually affect you.
Without doubt.
And just the final question I have for you on this topic is, what are the kind of headline stats and because you got your finger on the pulse with how engaged young people are. Where do you see the trend right now, and how has it changed? And where do you see it going, just as a kind of slight indicator?
So we basically our first look at all of the research we got from young people across the country. We had nearly 10,000 people, so it's an amazing survey.
That's so much credibility.
A lot of responsibility to kind of look at what people were saying. And we also found out if people had voted in the EU referendum, if they were kind of leave or remain voters. What we found was that stuff like that didn't matter. It didn't matter if you were 13 or 29. The kind of overall consensus between young people, it was issues like housing was really important. 95% of young people we surveyed wanted housing prioritised. They felt like they couldn't get on the property ladder, and that was an anxiety for people, even if you're young, to think God, I might not be able to buy a house when I'm 40.
Wow.
Mental health, absolutely huge. We found that people were actually talking about mental health and not even general healthcare. That's how much of a kind of concern it is. And I feel like we've done amazing things over the past few years to kind of help get rid of that stigma, but the services aren't always there for people who need them at the moment, and I think it should be, a huge priority. And then things opportunities like studying abroad, so Erasmus Plus came up loads. I think that was one of our headlines of over 90% people were they want this protected because this is my chance understand other cultures, and we know that our generation are the most globally minded, the most enterprising, all of those amazing things, and it's actually that should not be dropped. That's something we've got to fight for. So we're working hard to kind of lobby MPs on these and in their manifestos, and also just making sure that they're going to look out for this in Brexit negotiations. But those are some of the key things.
Thanks a lot, Elspeth. And I wanted to bring the previous conversation back to yourself, Jenardan, around do you feel that it is important, and if so, how do we go about ensuring that more young people are informed of how to think critically, but also what is really going on in this political world, so that they're not solely swayed by what the mainstream media is potentially feeding them about this run up to the election?
In terms of I guess my personal opinion on how to maybe get more young people involved is similar to what you're doing, which is just breaking down the jargons and making it more accessible. I still don't know what filibuster means. I've been sitting here waiting for it.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, Kesh, but essentially a filibuster is when someone, and I only know it to be present in the US political system. I didn't realise it was also present in the UK. But essentially what they do is they put something in place which says that as opposed to just getting a majority to vote on a bill, and that's what causes it to pass, you have to get a minimum of 3/5 of the people who are in the Congress or within the that space to vote yes, or to actually second the motion. So instead of it just being a majority where it could be 51-49, etc., it has to be a minimum of 3/5 have to say yes to that in order for it to be passed. But then there's a caveat that if you put a filibuster forwards, then something I don't think you can propose a motion for X amount of time or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Kesh.
As far as I know, that's correct. But
it's just a system, isn't it? I mean, why? Something that really annoys me. I'm waste so much time with those little traditions and stuff, and I'm just sort the issue out,
Literally.
Just sort it out. We have it in the UK system. It's so archaic, and stuff does happen, but there is all these little rules and traditions, and it's guys, can you just debate the issue and figure out and just get it going?
But you see that a lot within our system, from legal to politics as well. It's someone's not happy with something, they'll go to the history books and pull out something, and translate it from Latin and be but didn't you know that this existed? And it's bro, you didn't even understand Latin. Yeah, you had to use Google Translate to do that. So don't tell me anything. Do you know what I mean? But sorry, we interrupted. Go for it, man.
Yeah. So no, I think just going back to, I was just talking about the jargon, and the more easier it is, the more accessible and more transparent it is, the more people would want to get involved to kind of take a look into this. And maybe it's just because I'm a medical sort of experience, the first thing that kind of pops into mind is like when you see a doctor and like, you know, on the placements and ward rounds, the doctor's always just trying to explain what's going on with the patient, and they'd use technical and jargon orientated sort of words just to also make sure that the patient can't understand and so that they're not worried. But surely they've also got the right to know. And it's a similar thing here that I feel like, you know, with politicians, if, you know, there's so much jargon involved, and let's say with all of the stuff that's been put out in the media, which is being targeted at the older generations, or the voting system and the way you stay informed isn't up to date with the current way we consume information, then it feels like it's almost them saying, you know, young guys kind of stay away from all of this. This is like a big boys game. And so having mediums like Undivided to kind of break it down and make things more accessible, I think is a great start as well. And I think at the same time, it also maybe comes down to individual sort of philosophies on how they see, or on how they kind of approach life and just see the world. So personally for myself, something I've always seen is that regardless of what goes on the outside, or the things that I can't control, I always want to focus on the things that I can control. So with politics and stuff, it feels like it's something that I can't really have much of a control in right now, but there are other things where I can sort of control. And sometimes, and I think the sort of conflict comes when we try and divide things as to either good or bad. So a lot of people would say, for example, that the £9,000 tuition fees are definitely a bad thing. I'm not here to kind of debate that, but the other side of this argument as well is that personally for me, because there was a £9,000 kind of tag on that, it made me think twice before I invested in that sort of medical degree at this moment. And I think that itself is a very useful thing as well. And it's also making me more resilient, and it's also helped in my sort of self-belief that I can overcome the obstacles and the investment that I'm putting in now. I don't know if it's worth the sort of price that I'm going to pay for it at the end, but these are just some of the benefits I've kind of gained out of it. And I think a focus also has to be put on the individuals to take more responsibility, and maybe I feel like, you know, in our generation there's this sense of entitlement that like we automatically deserve a lot of things, and to kind of maybe kind of also just see that we have the power as well. And when we realise that as individuals we have the power to influence things, I think that would also then kind of spill out into the system where people would realise that they maybe can have a bigger say in politics and kind of start reading about that as well. But I think maybe going away from that entitlement and just reinforcing that we have the power and the responsibility, I think that is also the second sort of area that I can see maybe that we need to focus on.
Definitely. I think that's interesting. You're talking about controlling what you can control. And I don't think that's something that we necessarily always take into account. You know, sometimes people, I hear all the time, you know, people who are in my family, you know, to my community who say, oh yeah, you know, well, they're not doing this for us and they're not doing that for us. And it's like, well, no disrespect, but there's an element of you can't do that for yourself, you know, like, don't get me wrong, we'd all love for, you know, the people in power to be able to provide us everything that we want. But unfortunately, we live in a world where we have to work with other people, and other people are going to have different viewpoints. They're going to need different things that may not necessarily suit you perfectly. But there is still a way for you to be able to thrive within the confines that do exist. And sometimes we do put the limits on ourselves. And sometimes that's something a lot of us overlook. Like, we can't control the outcome of this vote. We can control our vote, but we can't control the outcome of the vote. But what we can control 100% is our response to the vote. So, okay, we ended up seeing that it was a Brexit vote last year. Now what do we do? You know, and there were people like yourself that went and set up your own campaign to get young people's voices. How many other people just sat there and complained and said, "Oh, young people didn't want that. Why did they go and vote Brexit?" Whereas Elspeth turned around and said, "Well, if young people didn't want that, let me go and actually find out what young people did want, and then try and take that to, you know." But it depends on what you're willing to do, you know, and the decisions that you make. So it's so powerful.
So I feel like it's that time in the show where we take a look at some of the ways that people are trying to create change. And you guys that are regular viewers will know this. It's time for Social Reform Fail of the Week. So this is where we look at an opportunity or a way that someone's tried to create social change but hasn't really done well, and a mistake that we can learn from. So I spoke to you before the show to see if you could share a Social Reform Fail of the Week that you've seen You know, in your work as Undivided, a mistake that's quite common, and because we're talking about politics today in the general election, you know, what's the social reform failed in this area that you've seen that we can learn from, and everyone at home listening, watching, etc. can learn from?
Can I do some international ones just before?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
No, you guys want to go first? It's up to you guys. I really don't mind. I don't mind doing two really quick.
Okay, go.
So, I obviously, most people won't know this, but I was in Jamaica on holiday very recently. And one of the things that we were on the way to see my girlfriend's grandparents, and I just started, you know, a conversation with the taxi driver. And, you know, for me, it's like I haven't been there for a long time, so I really wanted to understand this place, which is one of my home islands, you know, one of the sides where my family is from. And I said, it's not just about, you know, talking about what are the sites and what are the you know, I want to really understand what's going on in Jamaica. So I started asking him, you know, like, talk to me about the political system right now. Talk to me about, you know, I know there's a new prime minister that's only been in for a year. Talk to me about that. What are your thoughts? And he said, what's quite interesting is the prime minister there is quite young. So it's one of the first times Jamaica's had a very young prime minister. And a lot of people were really excited about that. And, you know, even me, I heard that and I was like, oh, amazing. He said, yeah, it is very good. He said, you know, he's doing things like ensuring that more and more young people can get housing. He said, there's absolutely no reason for anyone to be homeless. He said, Jamaica's one of those places that, though it's a third world country, we have one of the lowest homelessness rates in the world because we just don't believe people shouldn't have a house. He's like, no matter how basic it is, everyone should have a roof over their head. And he said he's ensuring that, you know, you hold a job for 1 year, you get a house. That's how it works in Jamaica. You hold a job for 1 year, you get a house automatically. They make sure there's like a process in place for that. He said, but one of the things the Prime Minister's doing is he's doing all of these great things for young people, but older people are suffering. So the taxes for people who are slightly older has increased in order to be able to fund that, and more of those people who are older are now suffering. And so for me, that is a fail in some ways, because it's like, as much as you are passionate about those people who you feel are a priority, you have in some ways neglected another significant part of the society that you should not have overlooked. So that's in one way a fail. And then to keep it on Jamaica again, I read an article today about Carl Samuda, who needs to be exposed, who's the agricultural minister in Jamaica, who essentially was putting in all of these bills and motions to be able to get to take over plots of land that he says was going to be used to be able to add to the economy by adding to the agricultural sector in Jamaica. But really, all he was doing was using it for his own profit. So he was actually just growing things on the land for himself and then using it for his own profit by getting it all funded by, you know, the government and the economy to then benefit from it himself. So absolute failure of the week, you know, he needs to be penalised for that, and yeah, we just need to stick it on him basically. So if there's anyone who's Jamaican that's watching or listening, you know, let's all just make sure Carl Samuda gets his just desserts basically.
Get on his Twitter. I don't know if he's on Twitter.
I'm sure he's on Twitter, you know what I mean? But yeah.
Right, I'll share mine. It's like, obviously I said I make loads of mistakes. Another one of my mistakes, guys. My own social fail. But yeah, basically this thing happens when like you get together with loads of other like social enterprises and other people wanting to do good stuff, and you spend a lot of time like talking about the good stuff you're going to do, and then you realise you've lost like 5 days talking about the good stuff, and it's like, hang on, we haven't changed the world in 5 days, we've done something wrong. So we were sort of getting stuff together for the general election around getting young people to turn up, all around like turn up and, you know, getting people out there to vote, register and vote. And it was just one of those things where I was like, we've literally spent days figuring out and talking about it and haven't done anything. Okay. So we had this moment of realisation yesterday where like, that was a total fail. Like, let's just like propose something, get it out there and get it going.
Respect it, yeah. So, you know, at the end of the day, sometimes you can almost over talk things and sometimes talk yourself out of it.
Yeah,
you know, I had a conversation with a friend yesterday who said the same thing to me. He was like, I get a lot of business ideas, but he said, I'm so diplomatic with my thinking and I'm trying to be so simplistic with my thinking that I say, okay, yeah, let's not go for that just yet, let's just do this. I know, but then that's too much right now, let's just do this. And then in the end, I just say to myself, oh, there's no point doing anything. You know what I mean? So it's so true. Sometimes you have to just take action. You have to do something really smooth.
Yeah, just get out there and do it.
Without
That's our new thing. We're like, right, that was great, now we're just going to do it.
Janardan, did you have a social reform fail you want to share?
Mine was very similar to Elspeth as well. So it's just within the charity I'm working in at the moment to try and get a healthcare sort of health education project going out as well. So we've talked about it, sounds like a great idea and so on. So the first step, so just to kind of make it seem like we're taking action, the next step we did was to try and recruit as many people as we can. The mistake we made here was just to go for numbers and not to really consider, you know, the people we did want to recruit. Because as soon as you said the idea, everyone's like, yeah, I'm on board as well, and then they get excited about it. Next thing you know, you just got 10 people who are just excited about it, but haven't really decided. And the more people you keep on growing, the more it feels like you're taking action, but you're not actually going anywhere. And then once again, the more people you have, the more your focus can kind of scatter. Someone has another idea, and then you've got someone who's definitely going to kind of counter that, and it just doesn't go anywhere as well. So I think the fact that we've both had very similar experiences says something as well in terms of like how much the intention's always there potentially, but then it's all about taking action, like you said.
Absolutely. So I think we've got. Am I doing a social reform fair?
Have you got one that you would like to share?
I'll
build the buzz for now.
Build the buzz. So I think seeing as we're sharing from our own organisations, we'll share one from Revolution Hive's point of view. Social reform fair of the week for us this week would be, we just came back from a very, very useful conversation with one of the biggest consulting groups in the world. And it took me half an hour to explain what we do to them. And while I was explaining it, I was thinking, but you already know this. And it took me a while just to say, yeah, but there's, and I think sometimes there's that feeling that you want to share everything. But it's just knowing and thinking it through beforehand of what do they need to know and what are you here to discuss and what's the most useful way that you can use the time that you have together. So social reform fair of the week from my point of view as CEO of Revolution Hive was not getting to the point quickly enough so that we can really kind of articulate that as well as possible. And I think we've come definitely a long way, but myself and Lewis were really, really keen to keep that bar extremely really high, and we talk about social reform fair of the week for other people, but you can go to our mistakes page on the website and we'll openly tell you, these are the mistakes we've made, but this is what we've learned and grown and evolved and gone a step further, which is all about that journey. So
so thank you guys very much for sharing. So now we're going to come to our final section of the show, which is Build the Buzz. So this is an opportunity for our listeners, our viewers, to be able to send in questions and have, whether it be myself, Keshav, and our guests that are on the show, to be able to answer those questions so that then hopefully they can obviously learn from it, but also the rest of the viewers and listeners can learn from it too. So this question was sent in by Akil from Bradford, and he said, everyone's talking about Brexit and getting the best deal for the UK, for businesses, for the economy, for pensioners, the NHS, lawyers, government, diplomatic relations, and so on. But what I don't often hear about is the best deal for young people. If you were the Prime Minister, so this goes to both of you guys, if you were the Prime Minister handling the negotiations, what do you think is the best deal? What do you think the best deal for young people should involve?
That is a great question. So shout out to Akil.
Thanks, Akil.
Yes, it's a good question. So if I was Prime Minister, I would, got to have a strong economy. Everyone's talking about that. It's important, right? But
strong and stable.
Oh, no, don't go there. Not strong and stable, just a strong economy. But I would say, basically, I think our generation are like the most entrepreneurial, enterprising bunch of people. Like, look at, we've all like started something, we're all doing stuff. Like, I know everyone's got like a side hustle. It's like, I'm this/this. Like, all my friends are like 3 startups, like just things that they're like doing. They've got their kind of their own things going on. I'm like, we are like amazing. Like, we could give so much back to the economy. So I would set up something that like encourages like enterprise in young people. So things like this, like spaces and hubs that young people can use. Like, I think often it's just getting people to have a space that's not like their bedroom where they can sit and work on something. Like, if you focus on that and you build up really strong hubs all over the country for like, people from age like 10, you'll like build up entrepreneurial generation. It'll bring back to the economy, and it'll just be like, gives people something to do, gives people something to think, like focus on, when the traditional education system isn't serving everyone's needs. So I'd build these amazing hubs all over the country and get young people like panning out their ideas together.
Do and hats off to you for saying that, Elspeth, because I feel like, because I've been in the youth sector for so long, I got to a point where I began to sort of get a little bit frustrated at like, why are we always just coming together and talking? But then after a while, I actually started to realise that, that element is actually still very important. Just because you've been in it a long time, Lewis, doesn't mean everybody else has. And someone else needs that. And even me, I need to maintain, because then I started to move away from that and started saying, I'm just going to focus on building my thing. Then I realised I'm no longer involved in certain conversations, and now I'm less informed about what people are talking about, and that's still so important. So, hats off to you for saying that, because I think that is actually massively, massively important, because now what I'm starting to see is, because those spaces don't necessarily exist, we're seeing more and more people who, in my opinion, do not have the right or credibility to be leading certain conversations, and being seen as like, oh, this is a talk show for the things that are not being discussed. And I won't name what kind of talk show I'm talking about here, but this is a talk show for talking about things that are not discussed. I'm like, but everybody's talking about that though, so I don't understand how you're positioned as that, and you're getting the most views on the internet right now. You're taking over Twitter every single week because you are not bringing any substance to the conversation, but you're just getting that because nobody else has been given an opportunity to speak. So yeah, I completely agree.
Right?
Yeah, bro.
If I was in this position, I'd kind of put my hands up and say it's not my area of expertise, and then use that also as a strength to say that I'm open to kind of conversation to kind of go about understanding.
Powerful.
But I think that's what we're lacking. So, for example, when you were talking about the data you've collected through Undivided, finding out that housing and so on, all of these areas are what's important. These are things that I didn't know. I'm not sure if these are things that other people would have known is what matters. So it's first of all maybe asking that question of what matters before being told that this is what you need to do. And I think at the end of the day, even if you just open up that discussion and you kind of build that trust initially, and then let's say if you can kind of see where the young people are coming from, let's say with housing, and then you can kind of have that open discussion to say, okay, maybe this is not necessarily a priority right now because we have all of these. The fact that you've been listened to and engaged in that sort of conversation would still hopefully kind of bring in that support. So in terms of going forward, I'm not entirely too sure, but one thing that I've always believed is important is just the education. So just seeing how, what side of Brexit is how it's going to impact education, I think that's a key focus going forward.
I'm sure you've got a strong answer, so I'll chip in with a little 2 pence really quick. For me, I think a great deal for young people would be whichever party is successful, and this is based on the fact that I don't want us to neglect the rest of society, but whatever party is successful, being able to ensure that young people are aware of how to go about progressing through their life. Now, of course, I know that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. I know that all young people are going to go about doing things in different ways. But even if we were just to use something as simple as Maslow's hierarchy of needs and say, okay, let me at least ensure that young people know where to get food and water. Okay, we can tick that box. Okay, do they know how to get shelter? Okay, so they maybe can't own a house straight away, but do they know the places where they can get support with housing? Okay, at least we can tick that box and go through. So at least young people know how to go about progressing in their life. Okay, do they know how they can go about making income so they can either go and get a job, or maybe they know how to talk to someone to create a job for themselves. Okay, do they know how to start maybe an organization? What types of organizations can they start? So at least young people are aware of how to make their way so they can secure a place in our society, then look to build on that. I think whichever party is able to give young people that sort of blueprint, and when I say blueprint, of course, I know they're going to sway and they're going to diverge and whatever, but some form of blueprint so they at least understand how they go from being just a young person right now that's maybe in education or is currently still sort of like, dependent to becoming independent. To me, that's the deal for young people, because I truly trust young people from that point onwards. From they have their foothold, the young people we're seeing now, as you said, they're amazing. They'll do the rest. They'll do the rest. So for me, that's it.
So yeah, I guess there's you covered a lot of points there, and I don't really you took a lot of the best stuff. But I think if I was Prime Minister, when I'm Prime, if I were, in terms of Brexit, I really focus on linking up more with youth organisations like Undivided, because I think we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth for a reason. Like, listen and learn twice as much as you speak. And I think that's really, really vital to have your finger on the pulse to know what is it that young people want from Brexit. And you've mentioned it already. So more of a focus on mental health, more of a focus on housing, because we're more likely to be renting all the time. And if you're renting for 2 years and spending, if you're in London, up to £1,000 every month, that's 24,000 over 2 years that you're never going to see back. Whereas if you're putting that into a mortgage, that's an asset that you now own. So that also comes into education. So that's something that I'm very, very passionate about, is educating young people on things like effective altruism or reading Frantz Fanon. and learning about critical race theory, learning about things like, finance, economy, well-being, stuff like that. So these are the things that I would be focusing on, and also maintaining a lot of those links that we've had for so long, because I do think that as much as we're seeing some trends moving more towards a nationalism and being a bit more isolationist, I do think that there is a value in a shared community and a shared human experience, because one of the greatest challenges of our time is climate change. And if, even a 1 degree shift upwards is going to have a huge impact, and though we might not be living in that right now, we're going to have to face the consequences. And who are the people who are going to be alive and around for that? Us and our sons and daughters and grandchildren. So I think that has to be there. And you've got the Paris Climate Change Agreement. That needs to be enforced, because I think that's a very, very critical issue that, although it's not in the forefront right now, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe even 10 years, we're going to have to deal with that. Half the world's wildlife has been wiped out in the last 50 years. So those are some of the things that I focus on. But well, my manifesto, MJ.
It launches on now.
No, this is amazing. So, we're going to wrap it up. And when we do wrap it up, I'd love for you guys just to say one word that, it could be, for example, a call to action.
This is how I know you're a facilitator.
It could be one word that I'd like you to give to our viewers and listeners. It could be a call to action with regards to the election. It could be something that you want them to take away and think about, whatever it is. But I'd like you guys to finish on one word. But before we do so, it'd be great if we could just make sure that everybody knows where to connect with you guys. So, and then to support the work that you do. If there's anything you've got coming up that you'd like to share, please do. Obviously we're the same organisation. So Elspeth, if you don't mind, you want to kick it off? Where can people find you online? What are you doing? Is there anything they can do to support?
Sweet. So at We Are Undivided, you will stay up to date with everything going on there. We'll keep you posted on how we're making MPs listen. We'll remind you when the deadline to register is. So get everything on our Twitter. We've got a website as well, weareundivided.co.uk.
Boom.
That's at We Are Undivided and weareundivided.co.uk.
Links in the description, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it'll be all there.
And so I haven't got an organisation to kind of get in touch with, but feel free to kind of get in touch through Facebook, Instagram, just using my first name, I think, in all of them as well. And specifically areas that I'm looking for support in at the moment with some of the projects that I'm involved in is, if anything...
I love this guy. Sorry, yes. I just love this guy. Go on.
Cheers, I appreciate the love.
I'm hungry.
With just the projects that I'm trying to just kind of get going is, if there's someone looking to build their portfolio for websites, photography, videography, all of those things as well, there's plenty of opportunities that I can think of as well, and it'll be cool to work with people with that as well. So yeah, feel free to hit me up on Facebook and Instagram as well.
That's it. If you can find us, we'll put you in touch with Jenardan, but his name's spelled Jenarden. So yeah. That's I truly do love you as well. I'm sorry, man. I have to give him a hug now. But yeah, sorry. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. I'm flustered now. But yeah, and of course, you spoke about education earlier, so we're still actively looking to drive forward our work in schools. So, if there are any schools that I want to, kind of continue to have these conversations, because we want to continue having those conversations as well around educating young people in various different topics to do with personal development and social development. Something we're really hoping can happen is we're looking to do, in partnership with two other organizations, we're looking to do a tour of schools around the country which we call our Changemaker Election Tour, where we'll be doing political literacy and leadership training for students that are in either years 9, 10 or 11. And so, that'd be really exciting. We're hoping to do it in and around this time of the election. So if there are any people that can think of potential funders we can get in touch with, or if there are, schools in particular that would love to, work with us on that would be amazing. And finally, of course, for those of you that are watching and listening, you can go to the Revolution Hive website and check out the Hive Leadership Academy and pre-register for when it launches. Get your 30-day free trial for the time being. And anything else you want to add to that, Kesh?
No, I think we're ready to wrap up. So
one word from each of you. So I'm gonna kick off, because I feel like it's gonna get of increasing quality as soon as it leaves me. So if I get mine out of the way, the words are gonna get better. You know what I mean? Mine might be a 3-letter word. We'll get that to at least 8 and 10 letters as we get further this way. So so mine would literally just be active. That's it. I'm not gonna explain why. Just active.
My one word would be responsibility.
My one word would be register.
And the final word of this episode, revolution. Thanks for watching, guys. Leave your comments down below, and we'll see you next week.
Yo, that was a sick show, you know. That show was back. That was so bro, this show actually nice. This was a quality show, bro. It was just that. This show was fully flat, okay? I want to get out my chair.
Wise words. So listen to wisdom.
That's what I'm saying. No, that show was back. The camera went one time, minute, and you brought it back.